unconditional release of hostages that were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October attacks. It puts the party, though, at odds with Westminster colleagues, with Sir Keir Starmer stopping short of calling for a ceasefire, saying instead that he wants to see a sustainable end to the war. In other news, we've learned today that a third of small boat arrivals since 2018 have taken place while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. That's according to new analysis by the Labour Party. It comes after 52 people reportedly crossed the English Channel by small boat yesterday, meaning there have been just over 38,500 arrivals since Mr Sunak became Prime Minister. Labour says it's proof the government's focus on its Rwanda plan isn't enough to solve the crisis. But the government insists its policies are working, and it says the number of crossings last year are down more than a third compared to the year before. And finally, farmers in Kent have been staging a protest today at a Tesco supermarket. They say they're furious at what they've called cheap international imports. Around 20 tractors have been parked at Tesco Extra in Whitfield near Dover to raise awareness of what they fear could be a threat to Britain's food security. They say they can't compete with cheap foreign imports, and unless something is done, they say British farmers won't be able to afford to feed the public. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or of course go to our website gbnews.com/alerts.
At the time of his death in 1940, Major General Smedley Butler was the most highly decorated Marine in US history. In a book published in 1935, he wrote, "War is a racket. It always has been. It's possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives." Let's imagine a man like Major General Butler knew what he was talking about when it came to the subject of war. As well as physically brave, I would say he was morally courageous to the end of his days. He said that during his 33 years of active military service, he spent most of his time as a, quote, high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, he said, "I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism." A racket is best described, he said, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small inside group knows what it's about. It's conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. I would say it's plain to see that the racket has been going from strength to strength ever since. In his farewell address to the American people in 1961, outgoing President and old soldier Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about the threat posed by what he was already able to identify as the military-industrial complex. Quote, "This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications." This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new. We must not fail to comprehend its implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Now, nearly 90 years after Smedley's assessment of the cynical nature of war, the billions of dollars, pounds, euros and the rest continue to flow into the coffers and bank accounts of the few. And who are the few, those beneficiaries of the endless firing of bullets and bombs? Ghouls who see loss of human life only in terms of profitable columns on their balance sheets. It's a tragically accurate adage that young men who don't know each other and don't hate each other are sent to war by old men who do know each other and may or may not hate each other, but who shake hands and split the profits when all the young men are dead. We're still right there in that hellscape, hapless witnesses to the ultimate racket, as hundreds of billions of dollars and pounds flow into Ukraine and then back into the bank accounts of that military-industrial complex. Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has died in prison. US President Joe Biden was quickly thrust in front of the world's media to exploit that death to justify the sending of yet more billions of dollars to Zelensky's Ukraine. He said, "We have to provide the funding so Ukraine can keep defending itself. History is watching. The failure to support Ukraine at this crucial moment will never be forgotten." Former President Donald Trump was impeached in 2019 before any Russian tanks had crossed the Ukrainian border for pausing funds already earmarked for Ukraine, $391 million in security assistance, $250 million through the Department of Defence's Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and $141 million through the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Programme. Trump paused all of that because he wanted to investigate alleged Biden family links to Ukraine and was subsequently impeached. According to Republican Senator J.D. Vance, a new bill proposed by the Biden administration guaranteeing a further $61 billion to Ukraine, money earmarked primarily for US arms manufacturers, has within it a clause leaving any attempt by a future president to halt that funding vulnerable to similar proceedings. This has been described as future-proofing the funding of Ukraine against the possibility that Trump or anyone else in future seeks to interrupt the flow of dollars to Ukraine. Biden mourned Navalny's death. Even in prison, he was a powerful voice for the truth, he said. An interesting statement, while journalist Julian Assange, who published Truth Inconvenient to the US and the West, presently rots in Belmarsh prison as he fights extradition to the US. I'm not yet aware of Biden mentioning, far less lamenting, the death in a Ukrainian prison of US citizen and writer Gonzalo Lira, who was critical of the Zelensky regime. Biden's administration has sought determinedly to jail his and their strongest and most popular opponent, Donald Trump. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of Navalny's death, Biden highlighted Vladimir Putin's desperate attempts to stamp out the opposition. Zelensky, propped up only by Western cash, has crushed his own political opponents as well. The pattern seems clear. Bleat about enemies threatening democracy, while simultaneously and blatantly and hypocritically seeking to trample on democracy at home, or turn a blind eye to the same being carried out by allies, or make that business partners. A legitimate president of Ukraine was overthrown by a US-led coup in 2014. In the early stages of the Russia-Ukraine war, as early as April 2022, a peace deal was on the table until former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was dispatched by NATO to scupper that deal. Now 500,000 Ukrainian men and boys are dead. The war goes on relentlessly, and a US administration is seeking to undermine democracy so that a multi-billion-dollar war might grind on with no end in sight. Here in the UK, our own homegrown brand of warmongers are banging the drums and rattling the sabres. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has warned that UK is adapting to a pre-war world. Former Minister Tobias Ellwood has declared there is a 1939 feel to the world and that Britain is not prepared. All of that was before retiring Army Chief General Sir Patrick Sanders advocated the training of a citizen army in readiness for a future land war. Ukraine has used up its available generations of men and boys. Now those Ukrainians who absented themselves from the country in advance of the fighting face the possibility, if new legislation is passed there, of having to return to fight or face the seizure of their bank accounts and other assets. Maybe those men will return and maybe they won't. In any event, they won't be enough to satisfy a meat grinder that is being future-proofed against the possibility of its ever running out of steam. Who will be sent next? Whose sons will be cannon fodder in Ukraine? My sons? Your sons? As the Second World War played out, it wasn't equipment that was in short supply. The military-industrial complex had production well in hand. There was no end of brand new Spitfires and Hurricanes. What was in worryingly short supply was the men and boys fit to fly them. It takes an unavoidable minimum of 16 years to grow a boy to the point where he might become a soldier. And all those years are spent in moments by the ghouls who see only pounds and dollar signs. Smedley Butler knew how the war racket might be smashed. He said number one was the removal of profit from war, and also that military forces should be limited to defence of the homeland. There are only two reasons why you should ever be asked to give your youngsters, he said. One is defence of our homes, the other is the defence of our Bill of Rights, and particularly the right to worship God as we see fit. Every other reason advanced for the murder of young men is a racket, pure and simple. How blatant is it here in the UK and on the other side of the Atlantic in the US that precious little care is being taken of the homelands? In both cases, the borders, that ought surely to be a priority for our governments and fighting men, are left undefended in the face of the arrival of uncounted numbers of strangers arriving day and night. Here and in the US, the cities are filled with more and more crime, more and more violence meted out upon citizens. Of the First World War, Smedley wrote, "Beautiful ideals were painted for our boys who were sent out to die. This was the war to end wars. This was the war to make the world safe for democracy. No one told them that dollars and cents were the real reason. No one mentioned to them as they marched away that their going and their dying would mean huge war profits. No one told those American soldiers that they might be shot down by bullets made by their own brothers here. No one told them that the ships on which they were going to cross the sea might be torpedoed by submarines built with United States patents. They were just told it was to be a glorious adventure. Leaders here and in the US talk a good game about how concerned they are about the death toll of civilians in Gaza, tens of thousands of women and children among them. But still, the profitable bombs and bullets fly in the sky there. The coffers of the same few grow more bloated yet. I say we must swim clear of the warmongers who make blood money in our name. The horrors of the 20th century were supposed to serve as unforgettable lessons, but there's precious little sign that much of anything was learned. Talk of a citizen army reeks of the rhetoric of 1915 and Kitchener that led to the horror of the Somme, where 60,000 British men fell in a single day, nearly 20,000 rendered into butchered meat. I don't believe the majority of mothers and fathers here, or in the US, or in Russia for that matter, want to see their sons and daughters condemned to die in a Third World War. Here's the thing, war is a racket, the oldest, the most profitable, the most vicious. We see the racketeers. The Pentagon cannot even pass an audit to explain where all those billions of dollars actually go, how precisely they are spent, and yet always the call is for more. While Joe Biden ramped up the anti-Russian rhetoric in the wake of Navalny's death on this side of the pond, Zelensky addressed a gathering of security and foreign policy officials at the annual Munich Security Conference, where yet more deals were surely struck to oil the wheels of the meat grinder. Here we are with a forever war potentially future-proofed against any end of its funding, where democracy is sidestepped at home by those who would send our sons to die in the hollow name of democracy abroad. In any event, there's no talk of peace, only of war. It really is a racket. The only meaningful question is this: how long will we submit to a world run by racketeers and gangsters? Greg Swenson joining me from Republicans Overseas. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here, Neil.
Where are we with democracy in the West, in the United States of America, when an administration is seeking to tie the hands of presidents who have not yet been set into the Oval Office?
Yeah, it's pretty outrageous. They claim to be defending democracy. In fact, in 2022, in the midterms, they ran on that theme. You know, we're the defenders of democracy, and the Republicans or the people on the right want to take away your rights, and it's just all garbage. It's all rubbish, right? You know, the Biden administration is using every undemocratic method, every unconstitutional method to defeat their opponents. And in this case, they're trying to put their likely presidential opponent in jail or fine him to death.
And when it seems it doesn't matter even when you call out blatant hypocrisy.
Yeah.
You know, Hillary Clinton challenged, Putin about jailing opposition.
Right.
Joe Biden, this week in the aftermath of Navalny, is saying much the same. And when at the same time they've moved heaven and earth to try and jail their opponent.
Yeah, they're weaponizing the justice system. And make no mistake, this is Biden's Justice Department. There aren't rogue prosecutors that are going after Trump. This is all with the blessing of Biden and his administration. A lot of this stuff, and they're using not just the lawyers and the prosecutors, but they're using the entire justice system, the FBI, the CIA. You know, a great example was when they orchestrated the Russia collusion hoax. That was, definitely, if not initiated by, but at least supported by Jake Sullivan, who's now National Security Advisor for Biden. The effort to fraudulently put together this letter by the 51 former intelligence officials, complete hoax. That was to defeat and censor the New York Post and the Hunter Biden laptop story, which of course they ultimately all admitted was true. But that was led by Anthony Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State. So this is really coming from the top down. The organizations that are supposed to be enforcing the law and protecting Americans are censoring the very media that should be doing their job.
Isn't the time coming when someone has to stand up for morality itself? Yeah. We need to be reminded to remember and to hear spoken about the basic values of the rule of law.
Yeah.
that no one is above the law,
Right.
including presidents and kings and the rest.
Yeah.
When is someone going to speak up for that morality?
And it's become so tribal and so partisan that the Democrats, and especially Biden, run with that all the time. No one is above the law. Trump can't break these laws and get away with it. When in fact, there's a major protection racket going on, not only to protect Hunter Biden, which has been a real scandal, the way that they've done that, but also they're protecting Joe Biden. You know, Joe Biden was clearly benefiting from the payments coming from China, from Ukraine, from Romania, and from Russia, by the way, that were going into initially into the bank account of Hunter Biden and Jim Biden, but ultimately flowing to Joe Biden. Bank records don't lie.
What did you make of that judgment that Joe Biden could not be tried in relation to those documents that left the White House?
Yeah.
Because he was a frail old man who didn't have a memory, and yet he is simultaneously the man who sits with his finger on the nuclear trigger.
That's right. And so you can't be both, right? You have to. It's one or the other. You can't be unfit to stand trial, but also and then be fit to be president and to have the codes. And so that was a pretty outrageous. It was only last Wednesday or Thursday, and it came from Robert Hur, who's is a Republican, but not a hyper-partisan, and he was hired by the Justice Department of Joe Biden, right? So, this is, and by the way, that report was released only because Mayorkas, the Attorney General, decided to have it released. So they didn't have to release the report. They could have just said, we're not going to indict President Biden. But I think that what's clear in the report was that he did break the rules. He did willfully keep documents hidden.
Too old to stand trial, but not too old and frail and lacking in memory.
He should have just said thank you to Robert Hur, and instead
moved on.
Yeah.
We're on to the first break, after which, with looming possibility of nuclear war seeming growing closer every day, what can the West expect for its military in the coming months? I'll be joined by American Colonel Douglas Macgregor to consider the possibilities.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
We have let Islamist extremism into Britain, we've let it fester, and now we've let it win. Our absolutely spineless surrender merchant political top brass are rolling over while government ministers wear stab vests and quit their jobs in fear. Veteran Tory Minister Mike Freer has had death threats from Islamists as well as an alleged arson attack on his office. The motive there has still not been established. He's standing down because he doesn't want to die. I cannot emphasise how important this is. A minister of the government is quitting his job because he doesn't want to be killed by a lunatic jihadi. And our Prime Minister has said absolutely nothing. Nothing. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak said he was saddened. Is that it? Our Prime Minister should have been out on the steps of Downing Street saying that we will not be intimidated. We will not let this continue. Enough is enough. What does he do instead? He tweets about XL bullies. Yeah, fantastic. Where's Keir Starmer on this? Well, he's conducting focus groups on how to get the Muslim vote back, so he's hardly going to come out all guns blazing, is he? Ed Davey? Well, there's no way a Liberal Democrat leader would come out and admit that his ideology has helped turn Britain into a poster nation for multicultural failure. The police have let protesters, which include rabid anti-Semites, rampage around London every flipping Saturday for the last 3 months. And today, they are finally saying that they don't support some of the protests, which in the past have included a now banned terror group and people holding up anti-Jewish signs. They're saying, please don't march down Whitehall. All right, but will you do anything to stop them if they ignore you? I doubt it. I honestly cannot believe that we have sunk to the level where a serving minister stands down because of threats from extremists and our Prime Minister just doesn't feel the need to address it.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. More money for Ukraine, more money for Zelensky's regime, the death of Navalny. All of it seems to be nudging us in one direction and one direction only. To consider all of that, I'm joined now by retired US Colonel and political commentator Douglas McGregor. Are you there, Colonel?
Yes, I am, thanks.
Great to have you with us once again. The forever war in Ukraine, more rhetoric after Navalny. Is there any way out of this war?
Well, we confront two problems. One is what I would call broad disinterest of the American electorate in what happens beyond its borders. It's hard for Europeans to understand it, but most Americans right now are focused on the southern border. They're finally waking up to the destructive influence of immigration through these open borders, with uncertain consequences for us and our national security inside the United States. That's where Americans are focused. They're not focused on what's happening in Ukraine, and frankly, they never were. We have no vital strategic interest in the place. So that's the first problem. Secondly, down in the Middle East, you have the potential for a regional war developing. Americans assumed at the beginning that this would be simply another Arab-Israeli war in which Arab forces would be quickly defeated and everything would end well for Israel. Americans are now beginning to see that that's not true. But again, they see war as something that happens in other people's countries. They don't understand that things have changed. War can come to us in many, many different forms.
What do you make? I'm extremely alarmed by the mood music of talk of, here in the UK, of a citizen army. And more people with access to microphones and to the public space are talking about conscription and gathering together young people for what? For what? What do you make of that? Is that just empty sabre rattling, or do you think anyone anywhere is seriously contemplating engaging a citizen army in a land war in Europe?
Well, in the early 1900s, in the aftermath of the Boer War, there was an effort by the left in Britain to form a citizens' army. They thought this might be a means of undoing the class system or eroding its foundations. You had a Prime Minister, Campbell Bannerman, who stopped it dead in its tracks, and you ended up with Richard Haldane, who created really Britain's first professional army since Cromwell, I would argue. It was a very good army, but Campbell Bannerman made it very clear that this was not to be used on the European continent. It was not designed for that under any circumstances, that was a war that Britons should not fight in. Ultimately, Bannerman dies, and you end up with this man, H.H. Asquith, and sadly, Britain then marches into the First World War without really understanding the consequences. You've outlined those very well in your discussion that led up to this point. I can only hope that the British people exercise common sense. I can't imagine the Scots signing up for it. After all, they took very heavy casualties, disproportionate casualties. So did the Irish. I don't know what people in Britain think, but the notion that a citizen soldier army should be raised and sent east to fight in Eastern Europe is preposterous, especially since there's no threat from Russia. This is utter nonsense. It's a huge lie.
Greg Swenson, at least in those decades of the early part of the 20th century that the Colonel's talking about, there was general unawareness, ignorance of what would be the consequences of involving people in industrialised warfare. But it's 100 years later.
They're still
What possible excuse is there for suggesting that you would commit a citizen army anywhere on the European mainland?
I can't imagine what my grandfather was thinking when he was 18 years old and was sent to France to fight in the Great War. I mean, they had no idea what was going on in Europe. It was such a foreign topic. And Douglas brings up a great point. The U.S., any sort of U.S. commitment to Ukraine has to be looked at in the context of the open border that we have, the 10+ million illegal aliens that are coming in. What are they doing in the country? Why are Chinese coming through? Why are there military-aged men infiltrating our country? So he's got a great point. That's what people care about. And yes, there would be a majority of Republican congressmen that would vote for the support, but not while ignoring what's going on in our own country.
Colonel, what Greg Swenson is saying there, more and more we hear from NATO the notion that you only get to peace through war, which sounds alarmingly Orwellian. Where are the calm heads? Where are the grown-ups in the room, in Washington, in Westminster, to bring back diplomacy and surely the urgency for peace?
Well, there are probably two groups of people. One, those who are simply bought and paid for. I mean, the numbers of members of Congress in the United States who receive enormous subsidies via political action committees for supporting whatever Israel wants is enormous. Then you have to look at the people that are profiting from their commitments to the military-industrial congressional complex. By the way, when Eisenhower penned his speech, he did not say military-industrial complex. He said military-industrial congressional complex. And he was advised, well, if you bring this up, you'll make more enemies in Congress. We still have to get legislation through. So he backed away from that, which is unfortunate because it's very much part of the problem. We've got a lot of people simply profiting. And then you have another group that is in the category of believing that they can beat their chests, make outrageous statements without consequences. I know that sounds odd, but when you listen to people in the Senate like Lindsey Graham and others, they say outrageous things, but they don't think anything will happen. It's back to the original assumption that is so widely held. Oh, war? That happens in someone else's country. You know, you mentioned nuclear weapons earlier. It's incomprehensible to me that the Russians or the Chinese would ever consider using nuclear weapons. I see no evidence for it. I don't think in most cases we would, except we have foolish people talking about placing missiles in northern Finland and northern Sweden with nuclear warheads on them that could threaten Russia. That could change everything. The Russians will have to respond to that. That's insane. But again, there doesn't seem to be any real understanding of the gravity of these decisions, what they really mean. So we're led by fools, knaves. Let me go back and see if I can find Cromwell's speech to Parliament. I can't remember it all, but that pretty much sums up our Congress right now.
It's very alarming, Colonel, to hear a man of your experience in matters military going back over decades talk in this way. You know, it really does sound as though diplomacy is nowhere near us, peace is undesired, and we've got a military-industrial complex out of control. Is that really where we are?
Much of it is also fueled by a combination of ignorance and arrogance. There's a failure to understand that we don't live in the world of 1991 or 92 any longer, when we were arguably the last man standing. We had these enormous conventional forces, a very effective and powerful economy that had not yet been completely exported elsewhere. That's gone. Those capabilities are gone. Our forces are in ruins, just as yours are. We're in no position to fight a major war, but people on the Hill don't seem to understand that. And again, they may be completely ignorant of what you're discussing. You know, I grew up with Ukrainians and numbers of Poles and Lithuanians. I know them, but most people on the Hill have no idea what they're dealing with. They don't know the history. Remember what Henry Ford said, that Americans regard all history as bunk. Unfortunately, that's a serious problem in the United States. We just don't know the importance of history, culture, language, all of these things, ethnicity. We dismiss everything out of hand. Why? We're America. We're the new experiment. We're the image of everything everyone in the world wants to become. No, we're not. Our values are not universal. Our interests are divorced from reality. This is the problem.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, as once again, I have to say you have alarmed me. You do not set my mind at rest at all, but it's so important to listen to what you have to say. I hope we can pick up this conversation at some point in the not too distant future. Thank you for your contribution tonight.
Thank you, Neil. Bye-bye.
It's another break, I'm afraid, after which, well, with a record 500,000 people crossing into North America via the Darien Gap, just what is going on, and will the US ever get a grip on its migration crisis? Does it even want to? Renowned war reporter Michael Yawn joins me next.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, we hear a lot about the migration crisis here at home, but in the US, something much larger is happening. Record 500,000 people crossed through the Darien Gap last year, apparently. Can the US get a grip on that situation? I'm joined now by renowned correspondent and US Army veteran Michael Yawn. Michael, are you there?
Yes, sir. I am in Darien Province right now. I heard you mention Sir General Patrick Sanders before. I'm very curious on your thoughts on that, by the way. I was in combat with him in Iraq with the Royal Green Jackets, and then I was with the Royal Green Jackets again in Afghanistan. You know, this whole citizen army thing is quite concerning for me. I know where this leads. I am in Darien right now. I'm in Darien Province. You hear buses behind me. Some of these are filled with Chinese and others. This is China Camp. I'm going to walk out a little bit away from this building soon. Hopefully the video will hold up. But yeah, but by the way, Darien, Panama is like the Afghanistan for Europe. I mean, Scotland basically got killed trying to cross the Darien. You've probably heard of the Darien scheme, which led to contributed to the Articles of Union, right? What was that, 1707? And what was your Articles of Union for Scotland? And, you know, because Scotland started their Darien scheme down in sorry, my camera, started the Darien scheme. It may have been in, 1698 or so. Anyway, it bankrupted Scotland, and this is a treacherous place. But right now, go ahead, sir.
Michael, what are you seeing there? I was joined last week by Brett Weinstein. We talked about the scale of the number of people that are moving through the Darien Gap. How do you interpret what you're seeing? What is the explanation for the United States of America allowing this to happen?
It's war, obvious war, right? I mean, it's a hybrid war. These right here are aliens coming. Brett Weinstein was right here. I had him here last month, right? Right down here is what we call China camp. It's filled with Chinese right now. I just saw a bus full of Chinese come in. There's also Venezuelans and others come through. Syrians, people from Hezbollah literally come down here. Oh, they know that they don't disown Venezuela. All right, so there's some Venezuelans. And, right.
You say, Michael, you say a war.
Yeah.
What kind of war?
Well, part of it is, weaponized migration, clearly, as you see. This is Highway 1 here. They're heading to Highway 1, as you can see. That's Highway 1 that goes to the United States, right there. Right, here they go. So they are free to come and go. You see these buses over here. Actually, if I could walk down further, but I'll lose signal. But these buses down the road down here are lined up. They go night and day to take people to the United States. So the people that survive the Darien Gap, which most of the Chinese do survive because they pay a lot more money to come, and so they're coming through through in tens of thousands per month. You know, Hias is right down at the end of this road, by the way. So about 150 yards from me, 200 yards from me is China camp. Hias is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and those are actually a Jewish group that actually the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alex Mayorkas, was a board member on Hias, right? Mayorkas himself was a refugee from Cuba, right? Jewish parents. So he was a board member on Hias, and Hias right here is actually helping to fund Hezbollah coming right down this road. The guys from Venezuela, there's a huge amount of Hezbollah in Venezuela. A lot of people don't realize that. I'm not saying they are, but I'm saying that there's a huge amount there. There's a place in Lebanon, there's a village in Lebanon where they speak Spanish. Because they've come back from places like Panama and Colombia. Go ahead,
Michael,
sir.
I'm going to run out of time with you. However, while I've still got you, is there any possibility of America responding to this unofficially? By which I mean, are we approaching a point where there could be civil war in the United States of America, or could we see states seceding from the Union to try and protect themselves from what you're calling weaponized migration?
The United States is doing this. I mean, I hear Americans all the time saying, you know, we should punish Cuba or not Cuba, but sorry, Panama or Colombia or Mexico or whatever. I'm telling you, 100% factual, the United States is the prime mover of this invasion, right? And the chances of civil war in the United States, I returned to the United States in 2020. I just spent the previous almost 20 years overseas. Most of my life has been overseas, actually. And I realized the United States was going into civil war. That is why I returned, right? I was just in Texas a few days ago. I left Texas to come back down to the Darien Gap. I went to Texas due to the same situation. I'm often in Texas. I've been across the entire U.S. border from SpaceX on one end to San Diego on the other. So, I mean, I know that border quite well. I know I go to Europe. I look at the same things in Netherlands and Greece and Morocco down there, Lithuania. I watch this everywhere. I go around the world looking at these things, including Japan. A lot of people think that would never happen to the Japanese because they would never allow that, and they would be wrong. Japan is falling under the exact same information campaign, and the main engine of the migration, of the weaponized migration, by the way, is IOM, the International Organization for Migration. They're in this camp right now, right? The IOM is a huge organization. That's the main engine of the invasion. The number one funder is the United States. Number two is Germany. Number three is Canada. I could go on for hours. I know you don't have that much time, and I'm actually going to go into the camps, but thank you for having me on, Neil.
Michael, thank you so much for your contribution this evening. We'll pick this up again as soon as we possibly can, but thank you for tonight. Another break, After which I will be joined by Batya Ungar-Sargon to contemplate how the United States has become so infected with the toxins of wokery. Don't go away.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you,
sure,
and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, 1 year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951,
years,
whatever
right.
it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. In the break, I learned that we have lost contact with my proposed guest, but in his inimitable fashion, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Webster Vienna University, Ralph Schulhammer, is going to throw himself into the breach. He's not quite with me yet. So, coming to you at the moment, Greg, this sickness of wokery, and this, in Batya Ungar-Sargon's latest works, she has suggested that the working class and the middle classes in America have been abandoned, that nobody is speaking for them except Donald Trump.
They're getting robbed of their agency. And so this started with the Tea Party. It actually started before Trump. The Tea Party came about after Obama took over in 2009 with just reckless spending by the government and all this, bailing out the banks and then the $1 trillion spending spree. And people just started looking at each other saying, wait, they're taking my money and they're giving it to favored industries. Now it's the climate industry. But, this is outrageous. And they just said, no one's representing me anymore. In both parties, by the way, not just the Democrats.
And Democrats traditionally were the party of the working people.
The working men, the union guys,
And if anything, I suppose, in days gone by, the Republican Party were the kind of Ivy League elites that were portrayed as not caring.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, that flipped anyway. So that Republicans became the party of the working people.
That's right. And it's happened in the last 15 years, again, starting with the Tea Party, so that now the Democrats have become the party of the elite, the universities, the media, the government, and the bureaucracy especially. And so the Republicans have started to really look after working people. And I think it's understandable that working people are frustrated with the old country club Republicans, which didn't really represent them, but also the Democrats, who are now the party of the Ivy League. And the policies that they endorse, these Ivy League elites that work in government, media, universities, don't benefit the working people. In fact, it penalizes working people. And that's why Trump was so successful in appealing to them.
Who benefits long term from marginalizing so many people in the US? The working class, the middle class.
Yeah.
How can you isolate, silence, and marginalize all of those tens of millions of people and not face
It's
a
brilliant.
reckoning?
I'm not advocating it, but the Democrats have been smart about it. For every worker that they're losing, every union every union member that they've lost, they pick up two men or women in the suburbs, but they like to say the suburban women vote because that's one of their identity groups that they're dependent on right now. And the suburbs in America used to be reliable Republican ground. And it's not to suggest that all suburbanites have flipped to Democrats, but it used to be 70-30. So if it goes to 50-50 or even anywhere close to that, then they can rely on the minority groups, the other identity groups that the Democrats are completely dependent on. They can live without the working class because they have the minority groups, they have the Ivy League elite. It's a bet that they're making, and then you have 22 million illegal migrants in the country, 10 that have been there for quite some time, another 11 that Biden has purposely let in. This could ultimately lead to a permanent one-party state, that will be dependent on illegal migrants. They're going to vote Democrat, at least for a generation, maybe two. And so it's a bet. I hope it doesn't work, but it's worked quite well the last few elections.
How do these marginalised groups, and it is tens of millions of people, how do they reclaim their voice if, in many respects, neither red nor blue are properly representing them? Where do they go for a voice?
I think that's what's changed in the Republican Party. And it was the country club Republican Party. And I thought Reagan did a great job of appealing to the working class. It was the so-called Reagan Democrats in 1980 and 1984. They stuck around a little bit in 1988, but then ultimately moved back to the Democrats. So there's hope.
That Ralph, you're joining me now. Hero of the hour, stepping into the breach. Hey, Ralph.
Good to be with you.
I don't know what, if anything, you've been able to hear of the conversation I've been having with Greg. But suffice to say that the working class and the middle classes in America have been marginalised. They have no voice. Who benefits from that state of affairs? If that is the case, in whose benefit is it to set aside all of these working American voters?
Well, I would say the main benefit, of course, is for everyone who was able to capitalize on the outsourcing of actual manufacturing. I mean, this is the thing. We realize more and more that GDP is really no longer a good measure because overall, particularly in the financial sector, huge gains were made, but the working class lost. And I think this is something we realize more and more. We need to find a new way to measure economic prosperity. And I think we have to come to the conclusion that ultimately the financial side is one, but that labor gives meaning to life. And I think this is something we don't talk about enough, which is maybe if we produce more at home, it will be more expensive. Absolutely, because labor costs are higher. But imagine the millions of people that find meaning in their life, that will be more productive, that have maybe a reason then to have a family, to found a family, right? It could help with the demographic problem. We have a psychological issue we need to address, not just an economic issue. It's the one thing, ironically, where I believe that Karl Marx was right when he said that the essence of life is labor. And what he meant by this is us engaging with our environment, changing the world through our labor, like what farmers do, right? What miners do, what artisans do. And I think we need to find ways. I don't know exactly how. We need to find ways to get that back.
Is anyone speaking up for people who want and deserve to have that meaning in their life? Is there anyone in the United States that's standing ready anywhere within sight, ready to pick up that baton and run with it?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think we're currently in a situation where the old books are out of date and the new ones have not yet been written. I mean, even somebody like Donald Trump, who I actually feel a lot of sympathy towards, but he's the protest vote. He's not really what you talk a lot about, Neil, and I fully agree with you. He's not the revolutionary candidate in a sense. Like, I don't think he's capable, simply because he himself was marinated in this old system, to bring the change that would be necessary. So we need, and I'm not talking about the Bolshevik or French Revolution style kind of event, but we really need new thinking and new ideas in this area to say, okay, it's not just about the financial aspect, it's about the psychological aspects of what the new economy has to do.
I just need to jump in. Thank you so much for stepping in and picking up with those few minutes remaining. Speak to you again. 7 o'clock, this is Neil Oliver live on TV, online and on DAB plus radio. Thanks to all my guests, especially thanks to Greg. I wish I could have heard more from Greg this evening. Up next, it's the Saturday 5.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. We're looking ahead to Sunday. It's certainly going to be the best day of the weekend. For many of us, it should be drier and brighter. Before we get there, we'd have this weather front to move across the UK, but you can note the winds are coming in from the southwest, so it is going to be a mild night, and that will continue into tomorrow too. So we have this area of rain. Some of this rain will be heavy, especially across parts of England and Wales. Some poor travelling conditions if you are travelling overnight tonight. But behind it does turn a little bit dry with some clear skies, but also the risk of a few showers. But for all, it is a mild night. Temperatures in the south not much lower than 10 or 11 degrees. So into Sunday morning, we've still got the rain across the southeast. That will gradually clear towards the continent as we head towards lunchtime, and for many, it's a much drier and brighter day. Still the risk of a few showers around, but in between there'll be plenty of sunny spells, and for all of us it's going to be another mild day. Temperatures in the south potentially reaching 15 or 16 degrees. Having a look at Monday, another spell of rain working its way across the country. Either side, we will see some drier and brighter weather, especially as we go into the afternoon. Plenty of sunny spells developing across the country, but we will then see thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving later across western Scotland. And that changeable theme continues into Tuesday and Wednesday, but all the time, for all of us, temperatures staying by day into double figures.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seemed to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into